the great state of Oklahoma. I am so thrilled to be here. Thank you for coming out tonight. Thank you for joining us. I'm honored to be in the company of patriots. How about Glenn Beck? Isn't he phenomenal? You know, every time I listen to Glenn, I learn something. He's an educator. You know, I love when Glenn pulls out his whiteboard. Begins walking you through the principles of the framers of the Constitution, the basic principles that built this country into the greatest country in the history of the world. When he starts walking through the evils of progressivism. You know, there are progressives in both parties. As Ronald Reagan liked to point out, the scariest words in the English language are, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help you." And an easy definition for a progressive is someone that doesn't understand why those words are so darn scary. Remember a couple of years ago when Glenn was talking about an Islamic caliphate? And everyone was dismissing him as some crazy right-wing nutcase. Man, I can't imagine what that's like. And then we've seen the rise of ISIS. We've seen them declare a caliphate. And we realize the power of speaking the truth. And speaking it with a smile, I'll tell you, I am honored to stand here with Glenn Beck, and I'm proud to stand with each and every one of you fighting for this great country we love so much. You know, this morning at church, many of our pastors might have gone back to the original Greek and learn a lot about a word from its roots. If you look at the word politics, it has two parts. Poly, meaning many, and ticks, meaning blood-sucking parasites. And that's a fairly accurate description of Washington, D.C. And yet, you know, we're here tonight for something a lot more important than politics. We're here because our country's in crisis. Because we're bankrupting our kids and grandkids. Because our constitutional rights are under assault each and every day. And because America is receding from leadership in the world, and it is making the world a much more dangerous place. And yet I'm here tonight with a word of hope and encouragement and exhortation. All across Oklahoma, all across this country, people are waking up. And there is a spirit of awakening that's sweeping this country. I believe this election is going to come down to three key issues: jobs, freedom, and security. Let's take them one at a time. Jobs. For 7 years, we've been stuck in the Obama-Clinton stagnation. The economy right now, it isn't working. If you're a single mom here, working 1 or 2 or 3 jobs, had your hours forcibly reduced to 28, 29 hours a week because Obamacare kicks in at 30 hours a week. If you're a working man or woman with calluses on your hand, and you've seen wages stagnate year after year after year, never going up, cost of living goes up, but your wages don't go anywhere. If you're a young person coming out of school with student loans up to your eyeballs, and you're scared, am I going to find a job? What does the future hold? That has been what's happened the last 7 years. You know, it's easy to talk about making America great again. You can even print that on a baseball cap. But the real question is, do you understand the principles and values that made America great in the first place? When it comes to our economy, the heart of the economy is small business. I grew up in Texas as the son of two small business owners in the oil and gas business. 2/3 of all new jobs in the economy come from small businesses. You want to kill the economy, hammer small businesses like we have the last 7 years, you'll kill jobs all over the country. You want to turn it around, lift the boot of the federal government off the backs of the necks of small businesses, and jobs will take off. If I am elected president, we will repeal every word of Obamacare. We'll pass common sense health care reform that makes health insurance personal and portable and affordable and keeps government from getting in between us and our doctors. And we will pass a simple flat tax. Where every American can fill out our taxes on a postcard. And when we do that, we should abolish the IRS. For far too long, we've seen politicians in Washington cut deals that benefit the rich and powerful, that benefit giant corporations, and that sell working men and women down the river. You know, no issue captures that more than immigration. Listen, immigration is an issue, it's a law enforcement issue, it's a national security issue as ISIS and radical Islamic terrorists are seeking to enter this country. But it is also at its core an economic issue. That when you allow 12 million people to come to this country illegally and to work illegally, it takes jobs from Americans and it drives down wages for everybody. Now, in a Republican primary, everyone says they oppose illegal immigration. But has anyone noticed that politicians have a habit of saying one thing and doing another? You want to tell where someone really stands on immigration, the moment to look is 2013, the battle over amnesty in the U.S. Congress. Now, a whole bunch of establishment Republicans decided to join up with Barack Obama and Chuck Schumer and Harry Reid in support of the Rubio-Schumer Gang of Eight amnesty. They made a decision that they were going to listen to the big money interest in Washington instead of the working men and women of this country. I'll tell you, I made a very different decision. My decision was that I would stand with the working men and women of this country, and we led the fight against amnesty. And where was Donald Trump in that whole fight? You know, I'm told on the campaign trail, he talks about immigration a fair amount. Well, you know what he was doing in 2013? He was funding the Gang of Eight. The Gang of Eight consisted of 4 Republicans, 4 Democrats. Donald Trump gave over $50,000 to 5 members of the Gang of Eight. Over the years, Donald Trump supported Jimmy Carter over Ronald Reagan, supported Harry Reid, Chuck Schumer, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, supported John Kerry over George W. Bush. You know what? You don't get to fund open border Democrats for 40 years and then suddenly wake up and decide you're for securing the border. We saw in the debate last week that Donald Trump had a $1 million court judgment against him for hiring illegal aliens to build Trump Tower. Now Donald says, gosh, well, that was a long time ago. You can't blame him for that. All right, how about last week? Last week, the news broke that his fancy hotel down in Florida, they bring in hundreds of foreign workers instead of hiring Americans. And after the debate, I guess he was feeling guilty, he went on CNN. And he said, look, the problem is, you can't find any Americans who are qualified and who want to work as waiters and waitresses. Now let me ask you, how many people here have ever worked as a waiter and waitress? Woo! Take a look at the hands. Donald Trump's position is there are no Americans who will work as waiters and waitresses. Not to mention, at a fancy Palm Beach hotel where people are tipping with $100 bills. You want to talk about a pretty good job. Roughly 300 Americans applied for those jobs. You know how many Donald hired? 17. Instead, he brought in hundreds of foreign workers. Now, I get why you can pay them a whole lot less, and they can't leave. They're captive. They can't go do another job. They can't fight. They can't give you any trouble. And you know what? What Donald has done is not that different from what a lot of other big businesses do. But you don't get to take advantage of American workers year after year after year and then suddenly wake up and say, I'm a champion for the working man and woman. Woo! If I'm elected president, we will secure the borders and we will end illegal immigration. Woo! We will cut off taxpayer funds to sanctuary cities, and we will end welfare benefits for people here illegally. And we are going to see more and more jobs for working men and women, and we are going to see wages rising. And when we repeal Obamacare and pass a flat tax, we will see small businesses exploding, millions of jobs, high-paying jobs created, young people coming out of school with 2, 3, 4, 5 job opportunities. Woo! The second key issue in this election is freedom. Our fundamental constitutional liberties. You know, 2 weeks ago, we were all stunned with the passing of Justice Scalia. Last week, I went to Justice Scalia's funeral. I was privileged to know Justice Scalia personally for 20 years. He was a lion of the law, brilliant, and a ferocious defender of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And his passing, I think, really underscored the stakes of this election. We are one liberal justice away from a 5-justice liberal majority, the likes of which this country has never seen. This election is not about one branch of government, it's about 2. We are one liberal justice away from the Supreme Court taking away the religious liberty of everyone here and holding that the government can force you to violate your faith upon pain of prison or fine. We are one justice away from the Supreme Court ordering the 10 Commandments monuments must be torn down all over the United States of America. We are one liberal justice away from the Supreme Court effectively erasing the Second Amendment from the Bill of Rights. We are one liberal justice away from the Supreme Court ordering that veterans memorials that have any religious symbols must be torn down all over this country. And when we are one liberal justice away from the Supreme Court putting us under the jurisdiction of the World Court and the United Nations and international law and giving up U.S. sovereignty. That's what the stakes of this election. And if you wanted it to be even clearer, the debate last week made it even clearer. At that debate, we were asked a question about religious liberty by Hugh Hewitt. And Donald Trump said, Ted, I know a lot more politicians than you do. He's right in that. And he said, Ted, you got to be willing to compromise. You got to be willing to cut a deal on religious liberty in the Supreme Court.
No!
Well, let me be very, very clear to the men and women of Oklahoma. I will not cut a deal and compromise on religious liberty. And I will not compromise away your Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. You know, it's worth noting, my two leading competitors have both previously supported banning firearms. Donald Trump supported Bill Clinton's nationwide ban on many of the most popular firearms in America. And Marco Rubio, when he was on the city council in West Miami, voted to ban firearms in public parks. Let me tell you this, there is no universe in which I ever support banning guns because I believe in the Second Amendment. And Donald Trump has told us what he's going to do. He said he's going to go and compromise with Harry Reid and Chuck Schumer and sit down and agree on a replacement for Antonin Scalia. Any justice that Chuck Schumer and Harry Reid sign off on is going to be a disaster and take away our rights, and we need a president who defends the Bill of Rights. And the third key issue in this election is security. For 7 years, we have abandoned and alienated our friends, and we've shown weakness and appeasement to our enemies. Once again, the debate last week made this issue perfectly clear. Donald Trump said, as president, he would be neutral between Israel and the Palestinians. Well, let me be very clear. I will not be neutral. If I am president, America will stand unapologetically with the nation of Israel. Over the last 7 years has been the weakening, the degrading of the United States military. We've seen our readiness declining precipitously. We've seen morale in the military plummeting. We've seen a commander-in-chief that doesn't support the mission of the armed forces, that doesn't back up our brave fighting men and women. You know, the last time we saw an armed forces that had been weakened by a feckless president, it was Jimmy Carter. And you think about what Ronald Reagan did in '81 when he came in. He passed tax reform and regulatory reform. He lifted the burdens of Washington off of small businesses. Small businesses exploded. We had millions of high-paying jobs. It generated trillions of new revenue to the federal government. He used that money to rebuild the military, and we bankrupted the Soviet Union and won the I intend to do the exact same thing with radical Islamic terrorism. We are going to rebuild our military so it remains the mightiest fighting force on the face of the planet. The U.S. military will no longer be governed by political correctness. We will have a commander-in-chief who stands up and says to the world, we will defeat radical Islamic terrorism. We'll have a president willing to utter the words, radical Islamic terrorism. one of the most shameful aspects of the last 7 years has been the president sending our fighting men and women into combat with rules of engagement that tie their arms behind their back and make it impossible for them to defend themselves and win. That is wrong, it is immoral, and mark my words, in January 2017, it will end. America has always been reluctant to use military force. We are slow to anger. But if and when military force is necessary, we should use overwhelming force, kill the enemy, and then get the heck out. Now, some of y'all may be wondering, can we do this? Can it be done? You know, Scripture tells us there's nothing new under the sun. I think where we are today is very, very much like the late 1970s, like the Jimmy Carter administration. Same failed economic policy. Same feckless and naive foreign policy. In fact, the exact same nations, Russia and Iran, openly laughing at and mocking the President of the United States. Now, why is it that that analogy gives me so much hope and optimism? Because we remember how that story ended. All across this country, millions of men and women rose up and became the Reagan Revolution. And it didn't come from Washington. Washington despised Ronald Reagan. You know, there are a lot of candidates in this race who are campaigning saying they'll stand up to Washington. The natural next question is, okay, when have you ever stood up to Washington? When have you taken on not just Democrats, but leaders in your own party? Right. If you want to know who will take on Washington, ask the question, who is Washington attacking? The Reagan Revolution, it came from the American people, and it turned this country around. Why am I so optimistic? The same thing is happening again. You know, we are now 2 days away from Super Tuesday. Super Tuesday is the most important day in this entire Republican primary. And let me tell you, Oklahoma is front and center. Woo! Oklahoma is a battleground. Right now in Oklahoma, Donald Trump and I are effectively tied in this state. That means this state has a platform. This state has a voice. This state has a megaphone. 65% of Republicans recognize Donald Trump is not the best candidate to go head-to-head with Hillary Clinton. That if you nominate a candidate who has agreed with Hillary Clinton on issue after issue after issue, if you nominate a candidate who's afraid to hand over his tax returns, if you nominate a candidate who's described Hillary Clinton as one of the greatest secretaries of state in history, if you nominate a candidate who's given $100,000 to the Clinton Foundation, that is a recipe for losing and electing Hillary Clinton as president. I want to take a minute to speak to the men and women of Oklahoma here and also folks at home. If you are among those 65% who recognize Donald Trump is not the right candidate to run and win in November, then even if you're thinking about supporting another candidate, listen, there are good people in this race, people I like and respect. But our campaign is the only campaign that has beaten Donald Trump and that can beat Donald Trump on Super Tuesday.